While Pixar has often prided itself on making original stories, and usually very well told ones at that, it seems that even they can't resist Hollywood's obsession with revisiting old properties, even if they still do it to a lesser extent than most. But that being said, the problem that Pixar often faces when approaching these sequels, prequels, and spin-offs is that there usually isn't a story left to be told, which can sometimes lead to it feeling like they're telling stories based off existing movies just for the heck of it. Though granted, some of their attempts to tell stories with a seemingly definitive endpoint have actually worked out really well, as the Toy Story series alone has proved. With the first three movies, anyway. But the point is, despite their sometimes revisiting older movies that don't really have any story left to be told, there is actually one movie of theirs that I believe could benefit from having a prequel to it, even if it's one I know that they'll never make. And there will be spoilers for the movie in question ahead, and maybe one or two other Pixar movies as well. So in case there's anything you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. Okay, so to start off simply, as of the making of this video, Pixar has only ever made one official prequel to a movie of theirs, which was Monsters University. And while that did arguably fall under the category of telling a story just for the sake of it and not necessarily because there was one, in the end they did actually do a pretty good job with it all, as people seemed to generally like it and it got good reviews. And as I even touched on in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, actually has some pretty valuable lessons to teach people. But I'm getting off topic here. My point is, Pixar's only prequel so far turned out to be a pretty good one, and I do believe a prequel to another one of their movies could also turn out to be just as good, with that actually being Coco. Because when you really look at it, the setup is pretty much right there in the original movie. What did Hector's day-to-day afterlife look like in the land of the dead before the events of the movie? Just the scene between Hector and Chicharon alone gets the imagination going on what a story like that would look like. What sorts of hijinks did Hector get into? What was he doing when it wasn't the Day of the Dead and trying to get across the bridge? Because as a man who's written books and would at least like to believe he's pretty good at coming up with plots, I can already see a movie about a lovable con man running all around the land of the dead trying to make his way, resulting in various yet comical misadventures. Now, is this a story that needs to be told? No, I'll freely admit it doesn't. But if it were to be told, it would make for a pretty fun movie. Especially because, as nobody can die since they're, already dead and can't be killed in the traditional sense, that could lead to some pretty unique situations, as well as setups and payoffs for some of the trouble Hector would inevitably get into. And what also helps is that it's never really touched on what Hector has been doing for the 96 years he had been in the land of the dead, beyond some vague details that are already pretty much a given. My point is, that whole time period is pretty much a blank slate, and Chicharon's one interaction with Hector could be more than enough to build a whole movie off of it, because it only further implies that Hector was up to a lot of mischief and getting into plenty of comical trouble. But honestly, it's for pretty much all of these reasons that I believe Pixar would never even consider making a prequel to Coco, and especially not the kind of movie I've just been describing. Because here's the thing, in order to make the kind of movie I'm talking about, it would have to be pretty lighthearted and low stakes in nature. I mean, there can still be serious and emotional moments, most definitely. I'd even say it's almost a given that there'd be at least one scene where Hector's lovable con man mask breaks and he laments the loss of his family. But on the whole, the premise that would make the most sense is, like I already said, an almost episodic, one caper and con after the other type comedy of errors. Now, you're obviously free to disagree with me on that, but again, as a writer myself, I do feel that would be the best way to play a prequel to Coco focusing on Hector. Especially because, given what we see in the movie, we know that Hector can't meet Ernesto again yet, we know he can't find out the truth, and we also know that any attempt for him to reconnect with Imelda won't work out and that they can't figure out anything either. So honestly, it would be better off if neither of them were in the movie at all. Maybe barring a cameo or quick scene. But getting back to what I was saying before, that's not how Pixar would do it. Because as is widely well known and as I've gone over many times, Pixar is all about the story and trying to be as emotionally deep as possible. So if they were to do a prequel about Hector, it would probably end up being about him going on some quest through the land of the dead and uncovering some great secret, all the while probably regaining an ounce of his self-worth and determination to keep trying to see Coco. And honestly, that would be a story not worth telling at all. Because while it could be a good movie on its own, don't get me wrong, the problem is that it would amount to nothing. It would have no bearing on the plot of Coco at all, as we already know how the story has to go. So there would be no reason to tell a story of that nature. Heck, he couldn't even find out anything about the final death, because it's clear in the movie that he's just as in the dark as everybody else and is quite terrified of it. Now, as I noted before, while my idea for a Coco prequel would be equally unnecessary, the thing is, it wouldn't really be made to enhance the story, and more just for fun. Again, that's why I specifically designed it to be of little consequence while keeping it within the confines of what was already established, as there is a pretty good potential for a story of that nature. But like I just touched on, the problem is that Pixar would try to turn into this big, story-driven narrative, and since that would be completely inappropriate for a prequel to Coco focusing on Hector, they would never even consider it. Which I do believe is for the best, don't get me wrong. My only point is that I feel they're missing out on the opportunity to make a smaller scale story that could just be a fun time for the audience, especially because it's both based off an existing brand and something that could be explored in more detail. To put it simply, instead of being a true Pixar movie with all the trimmings, I believe a prequel like this would benefit from being more like a direct-to-video sequel or a movie released straight to Disney+. Something that was made pretty much just for fun and can be taken or left by the individual viewer as much as they choose, as in the end all it'll maybe do is help you appreciate the character of Hector a bit more when watching Coco. I know some might even argue that there's enough material for a whole TV series with this, but I believe that a whole show focusing on Hector's hijinks would get pretty old and repetitive, especially because the audience already knows what the end point has to be. That's why I'm saying that a more low-key movie depicting some of Hector's misadventures over the 96-year period he was there would be the best thing to make based off what's presented in Coco. Again, I know it's a prequel that Pixar would never make, and not unreasonably either, but my point is that if there was an appropriate story to be told based off one of their already existing brands, that would be it. Okay, I think that was everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that a prequel to Coco focusing on Hector's afterlife in the land of the dead could actually be a pretty good one if done right? Or do you believe it would be nothing but a complete mess and is totally unnecessary? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And let me just once again reiterate that you do not have to agree with anything I said in this video. I was only giving my opinion on this, and if you think I was dead wrong about everything I said, that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.